Good morning, everybody. Welcome to This Week in XR, which is typically hosted by myself, Ted Schilowitz, the Futurist at Viacom CBS, and my good friend Charlie Fink, who's a columnist for Ford and a pundit and guru in the mixed reality, virtual reality, extended reality world. This week, because Charlie is taking a well-needed vacation week for the summertime with his family, we have a different co-host or sort of group hosts together. A good friend of mine, Jason McDowall, who is also a visionary, luminary, and very much focused on the XR community and the XR dynamics. So he and I are going to take over for Charlie and I and do our podcast. We'll report on the week of news that Charlie puts up on his column, and we'll discuss all that. And then Jason is also going to be our guest today and talk about the company he works for called Ostendo, which I am an advisor to. So we are both very well connected to that technology and world. And that's how we're going to spend our half hour today. So welcome, Jason. If you want to give people 2 minutes on your background, and then we'll dive into the news.
Yeah, thanks, Ted. It's really a pleasure to be here. I do not believe I can fill Charlie's shoes, even in the slightest way.
The two of us who can't fill Charlie's shoes.
I think that's absolutely the case. So, some folks might recognize my voice because I also host a podcast called the AR Show with Jason McDowall. And there I have the great pleasure of having a chance to interview a number of folks across the spectrum, primarily focused on augmented reality, but occasionally some virtual reality things thrown in as well. I'm really excited to chat with entrepreneurs and investors and executives at larger companies, trying to understand what's going on across the market. You and I are really passionate about the space, and we've been chipping away at it for a number of years now, but it's still really early, still very early in this market. And I really enjoy trying to understand and unravel this mystery together, kind of with the rest of the community here, right, about what's coming and how it's coming. So that's how I spend, my public time. But on the side, I also, as you noted, work full-time at a company named Ostendo. We'll talk a little bit more about them later. And I'm also pretty active as an angel investor. I support WXR Fund. You've had Amy Lemaire on here as a podcast. So I'm a venture partner there as well. And then also as an angel investor. So I love this space so much that I'm involved in everywhere that I can be, really, at this point. So it's a pleasure to be part of this community. And thanks again. You and I have had a chance to chat on the podcast and off the podcast many times, but on the podcast, one of my favorite episodes was the two-parter that we did back in the Paramount studio lot.
I agree. We had a really good time, and it was great to be a guest on the show. I listen to the show regularly. You always have interesting people on the show across a wide spectrum. And I think my favorite, I'm glad you like mine a lot. And I've sent that to a lot of people over the years saying, if you really want to get the deep dive, listen to this thing that Jason and I did as a two-parter for a good long time. And people really like that because it kind of holds up well, kind of interesting how we were pre-predictive of where the market was going. But I think my favorites are when you get into it with Carl Guttag, who is also a very, very fascinating and interesting character, extraordinarily opinionated and extraordinarily intelligent, and goes deep, deep, deep into this stuff, a bit like a debunker, but with a positive spin on like understanding what the technology is. So you get a lot of credit for holding your own with him and teasing out the stuff that he really wants to talk about to the world. So I definitely recommend people listen to the AR show in addition to this podcast. So there you go.
Thank you. Just a quick comment on working with Carl, having these conversations with Carl.
Yeah.
Some people hear him as a naysayer, but the reality, as you and I know him a little bit, the reality is that he's a huge proponent of the market, but he's really wants to make sure that it evolves in a positive way and that we don't keep going through hype cycles followed by, hangovers. And he wants to make sure that the technology choices, the things that people are talking about, have some merit, some basis in physics, and have some potential to make sense over the long run. And so while he might be saying, no, he's really championing yes, but in the right way, way that makes sense.
Yeah, and he takes just like you and I, he takes a long view on this stuff. He understands the trajectory, and it is an important role to challenge what people are putting out there and ask these very important questions. He goes much deeper than I do from an engineering perspective, and I think my role tends to be a little more diplomatic. Like, I am very positive about people's attempts to do things, but also with a pretty critical eye to some of the challenges that happen. And maybe even before we get into the news, this is kind of a little touch point, just to see where you fall on this. I think one of the big misconceptions, and I know Carl has talked about this a little bit too in your podcast and some of his other blog stuff, that people are sort of trying to make this presumption that there will be one device that will kind of encompass all of the use cases for mixed reality, when I don't see that as the case at all. Just in the same way that we use smartphones, laptops, tablets, large desktop computers, servers, and home entertainment computers, which now we refer to as televisions, right? They're basically just computer screens that we hang on the wall that basically have a pipe to them via the internet. I think there are going to be 5 or 6 devices over the next 10 years that will find their homes in entertainment, in enterprise, in light touch, walk around with things that look like glasses, and never going to walk around with things that are much more powerful that look like visors. So the fact that we're all in this perception that everybody's trying to cram it all into one device, I think is a misstep and a misconception that the market will not end up being that.
There's a lot.
There's a lot to unpack there, right?
To unpack there. So I this notion that the smart glass or the AR glasses are going to replace the smartphone, are going to replace the laptop computer. There's nothing in history that suggests that. We tend to add. One of the very few communication technologies that we occasionally abandon a communication modality. We abandoned telegraph, right? We've almost abandoned the fax.
Oh, we evolve it, right? We evolve it.
Yeah. But we have not given up this notion. We have a computer on our desk, as you noted. We haven't given up the fact we have a computer in our living room. We have computers now in our car. We're adding more specialized computers. We have now computers in our cars that are doing a lot more different things. And we are adding computers in our refrigerators. Like, we're adding computers everywhere. And so the notion that suddenly all of these others are going to go away and it's just going to be all embodied in a single head-worn device, I think is unlikely. And so what in reality what's going to happen is that sort of device needs to play well with all of the other bits of computing that we've got going on in our lives.
Correct.
And there's benefits for it playing well, because one of the huge challenges that we have with something that's worn on our face is that it actually has to be wearable. It has to be something that you can wear for some extended period of time. And that by itself is one of the biggest, hardest challenges that the industry has not yet solved from a hardware perspective. And to this notion that we have a variety of them in our lives, especially early in the market. But I think even as we evolve over time, we're going to find that there's a huge benefit for having specially designed things. There's a driving pair of glasses. There's an entertainment pair of glasses. There's a productivity at work pair of glasses potentially.
Totally. Yeah.
And I think we start there, and maybe we continue to evolve that over time. And part of the challenge is because it is so focused on wearability. Like the constraint of something being worn on your face is really, really hard constraint.
Mm-hmm. Very hard challenge, right? Exactly.
Yeah. And I think.
Yeah.
Oh,
I was just going to say, so I think probably what we'll do is I'll do another podcast with you on your show, and we could deep dive into that. But because people tune in every week to listen to the week's news in XR, we'll probably should go into that. So that,
sure.
And then because you and I could go on for a long time with this stuff. I guess you and I can kind of go back and forth on some of this stuff and just kind of go through the news. The first thing is we always report on the festival front and what's happening, week over week, month to month with the different immersive festivals through, of course, the pandemic year. Things are just starting to get back into some degree of a hybrid in the real world and metaverse version of these festivals. So this week is Tribeca. And they had a small installation of 5 or 6 pieces in person. This is the first year in many years I haven't gone yet because I'm now vaccinated and just emerging from my cocoon into certain things, but not quite ready to do a festival yet. That'll be a few months from now. But they're also doing some stuff in the Museum of Other Realities, which if you have a VR headset, you can sign into that and check out their stuff. So Tribeca is one of the major festivals every year that focuses on immersive entertainment. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Is Charlie there this week? Is that where he is?
I don't think so. Actually, I don't know. I mean, I let him go on vacation and he needed to kind of go off the grid, and he's off the grid. So
yeah, I was not sure exactly where he is either this week, but it would not surprise me if he was there because this is his scene. Next week if he's there. Right? Yeah, I didn't even ask. Yeah. The New York City festival circuit, I think, is where Charlie feels maybe most of the time
most comfortable.
Yeah. And it's amazing. We're kind of coming out of COVID here, and it's great that there's actually some in-person activities that are now possible. And being able to experience it in the room where you have not just the virtual part of the experience, but kind of the rest of the setup, understanding and engaging with the creators and understanding the backstory behind the story, I think makes the experience that much more fun. So I'm delighted that there's an in-person component to the festival this year.
Yeah. There's a couple other things in the news that are kind of interesting. There's a smaller company called Red 6 that focuses on military applications for augmented reality, mixed reality for training. They raised $30 million in funding, which is significant, after a small seed round earlier. And they have kind of this long pedigree of, as you well know, one of the first real mainstays of a mixed reality universe is in combat training for fighter pilots, right? And you obviously come from the military, so you know. And a lot of the evolution of the technology comes from these large headsets where even looking down for a moment at a control pad or something that isn't directly in your field of view can be a critical period of time, in microseconds period of time. So interesting that they've raised some capital to continue their journey. And that probably dovetails to the very large story that Charlie and I talked about a number of weeks back, that Microsoft landed this monstrous contract with the military. I think it's $22 billion over 10 years to develop augmented tech. And every time I see the photographs and things that they're doing, I feel like, boy, talk about, we have a long way to go, because these things are almost like flight helmets that they're wearing in their soldier suits. And you're like, that's never going to fly. Like this actually helps us evolve the tech, because with that kind of money, they will have to figure out how to make this light and nimble and truly wearable, and something that the soldiers will actually commit to outside of a training, environment to actually use in a combat situation or a high stress situation.
Yeah, first a comment on Microsoft, and we'll come back to Red 6 here.
Okay.
But on Microsoft, $22 billion. I think about the $3 billion that Magic Leap raised, and what they were able to accomplish with that $3 billion. And I think, well, what if we had spread that $3 billion across 30 other companies of innovators in the market?
For my $3 billion, I got a water bottle that I use, actually I'm using right now, and a bunch of Magic Leap glasses, and I'm still very well connected with that company. So I wouldn't count them out just yet. I think they actually have a lot.
Not at all. But from the notion that that's a lot of money in the hands of one company, and we're hoping that they're able to evolve that into something that's viable. And we can come back to this topic a little bit later, maybe about this evolution, how the kind of the market evolves. My opinion on it anyway. But it's exciting in that there's efforts there. Military's been forefront, the forefront of heads-up displays and augmented reality for decades. And this fighter pilot helmet was really one of the first areas where waveguides were kind of first introduced, and heads-up displays. This whole notion, they were actually using CRT as the monitors back in the day. But it's really exciting. But Red 6 goes well beyond that. It's not just the fact that you don't have to look down in order to understand situal weight awareness. It's that one of the huge challenges in training, in military training, and especially in aircraft training, is that those systems, the aircrafts, are really expensive. And so whether you are training with friendly aircraft, but you don't need them now because you can simulate the fact that aircraft is there, or you're training against enemy aircraft. You can't quite replicate them because you don't have a bunch of enemy aircraft around, but maybe you can model them. So this notion of doing simulation training while in the air in a real aircraft, I think, is a really interesting amazing use case. So I'm excited that they have the money that they need to kind of.
And for aviation, just as a category, simulation is a big part of their world. Like, you don't put people into a commercial airliner where they have, like hundreds of souls to protect without many hundreds of hours of simulation, extraordinarily advanced simulation. So this is just part and parcel to that. So it's a really good category that we study. I think maybe there's one other thing, and then we can dive into maybe the big stuff, which is WWDC this week, the Apple Developer Conference. There's a company called Pixarray that raised over $4 million in seed funding to develop what we call adaptive eyeglasses. And there's some kind of rumor mill stuff about that. This is part of what Apple is also working on. So this dovetails a little bit into the idea of like not hard prescription, but actually using technology to bend the glass and actually make something that can actually be tuned in interesting ways. So that's an interesting area to keep an eye on. I don't know if
Pixarray, I hadn't read about them before, so it's Charlie's article that I saw them for the first time. But they're using a technology that's been around in our TVs for a long time, liquid crystal, but they're incorporated into a see-through lens.
Right.
And as the light passes through, as you notice, the light passes through that liquid crystal. And depending on how you adjust the liquid crystals inside, you can actually bend the light so that it behaves like a normal pair of corrective eyewear. It seems that their initial focus is on normal corrective eyewear, which would be amazing. But there's a lot of tech infusion that needs to happen for that sort of system to work. And as we think about one of the challenges with any sort of head-worn AR system is this fact that half of our population, or whatever it is, some large percentage, needs correction. And if we're replacing that with some sort of AR glasses, how are we going to do those things simultaneously? For all the enterprise rigs out there, you insert basically a pair of glasses into the overall contraption that's on your head. But ideally, you just have one pair of glasses, and that pair of glasses is able to accommodate both the AR functionality and the corrective vision functionality. So
Correct.
this sort of LCD technology has been around for a number of years. There's been a lot of research on this area. And it's exciting to see somebody trying to bring it to market. One of the things that they seem to be doing differently is they're also incorporating eye sensing into it to kind of make sure that the lens is optimized so it's only correcting where you're actually looking in that moment, which has some benefits for the sort of
relates to the sort of foveated rendering discussion, which is probably another longer discussion we could have on a different forum. But if the listeners here are interested in where optics are going, just do a search for foveated rendering and foveated optics, and you'll get into a learning track of field of view and actually understanding what the vision system does. Pretty interesting. Maybe last, before we dive into your world, your comments on WWDC, because I'm very connected into the Apple ecosystem for many, many years. I spent some time in that world, and they continue their track of being extraordinarily bullish on augmented reality and mixed reality from the top down. And there were some significant announcements, not groundbreaking announcement, but significant forward propulsion in this area. So maybe you want to touch on a couple of those things.
Yeah, Apple has been, very implicit about their efforts around augmented reality, certainly the head-worn augmented reality. Explicitly, we've seen ARKit, and it's been slowly evolving over the years, but they've been laying the groundwork. We can at least stitch together a story. We can tell where it seems like they're laying the groundwork for some head-worn systems that are coming out. And this latest WWDC had a couple of elements in there that were not necessarily explicitly about AR, but definitely were very tied to AR. Certainly even head-worn AR, but one that's been more explicit, right? People have been using mobile AR a lot for shopping. How do I try on or try in this particular object before I commit to it, whether it's lipstick on my face or eyeglasses on my face or a piece of furniture in my living room, and using the video pass-through sort of AR system that mobile phone allows us. That can be amazing, but one of the huge challenges that the industry faces is how the heck do we create all of this high-fidelity 3D content? The object exists in 3D, but to digitize in some sort of lifelike way with the right sort of lighting that object so it can be used in this sort of AR is a challenge. And photogrammetry is a technology you basically stitch together a series of pictures, has been around for a long time, but Apple demonstrated that it can be done really well using the smartphone as part of that solution. So that was really interesting. It's one of those things that's one of many pieces of puzzle, one of pieces of the puzzle, but that was really interesting. One of the things that I thought was really phenomenal was the computer vision work that they're doing. Again, they're not the only company doing that. There's nothing that Apple does that others don't do, and sometimes others do better, but Apple manages to put things together in a really, really slick way.
Yeah, compelling way from a user perspective.
Absolutely. And so there's a lot more image recognition. We think about the evolution of augmented reality, and so much about the potential for the glasses is that it is contextually aware of what's going on. That you don't have to explicitly tell it all the time exactly what you want to do. It's actually paying attention to the world and interpreting what's going on and using that to improve your experience. That's the vision. Plus, it needs to understand the world well enough to overlay digital content to the extent that that's the experience, right? If an entertainment experience, for example, needs to be tied to the real world, then it needs to understand the real world at some level also, but at least in different ways. But here we're talking about object recognition. We're talking about extracting information, recognizing it's what it is and what's being said, the text that's there. And these are all, I think, really excellent, again, pieces being laid by Apple to kind of stitch together this potential that they can create something that's super compelling once it's on the head.
Yeah. There were announcements about how they're using the latest iPhone cameras to essentially do advanced photogrammetry, things you would only be able to do with a DSLR with like thousands of pictures just one generation ago. Now you can use your phone to basically capture an image and make a 3D model of it at a fairly low cost and low impact zone, which is really interesting. And then their overall reality kit stuff that they talk about how they're evolving that. It goes pretty deep. If you're really interested in this, they do recaps of the sessions. It's all public out to the world. It used to be more of a private event. Now in the world of everything being connected in this sort of video landscape world, they put a lot of this stuff out publicly. So there's tons of sessions about this stuff. And just like as a good starting point for the listeners, just go on the Apple website and look at their things that they talk about augmented reality. And you can see how much effort they're putting in from a messaging and learning standpoint using the iPads and demonstrating kind of a future that we believe is going to move from the holdable device to the wearable device, just in the way that they have evolved the audio. The ears have become a very big business for Apple now with their AirPods, and they continue to evolve that with spatial audio and better ergonomics. And we see a very clear track to the idea that if they've gotten a very refined understanding of where the audio system works, they're also getting a very refined understanding of where the visual system works. And they're setting the groundwork with all these devices that you hold to then eventually not have to hold them anymore. So there's lots of resources out there that you can look at. But I would start just on the Apple website itself, and then go look at Mac Rumors and some of the other sites that talk a little deeper about it, in gadgets and gizmodos of the world. So that was what I wanted to cover. Oh, there was one other thing. We're always keeping an eye on companies that are doing these mixed reality wearables that sort of pop out of nowhere and live in the Kickstarter ecosystem. So before we get to you as a guest, there's a company called Photon Lens that was a Kickstarter. Looks very similar to some of the other eyewear that kind of goes all the way back to the pedigree of ODG, with that what's called birdbath sort of optics design, which you've talked about on your AR show quite a bit, and people can listen and learn more about that. But they've got a new product, this company called Photon, that has a product launch in June 15th, and you can go on that website, photonlens.com, and they have like almost kind of a Nintendo Game Boy style controller, and they're focusing on health, wellness, and health activity stuff for mixed reality. So just wanted to keep an eye on, a little bit under the radar, but I'll go to their launch event like I do with all these things, and we'll learn more.
Yeah, I love it. This Photon Lens, as you noted, is kind of in the pedigree of the ODG. I think my interview with Carl Guttag was titled "Attack of the Clones," which is this notion that this system, this notion of pasting an OLED lens on top of a birdbath optic, which is kind of a thick curved mirror sort of optic, is the accessible way to deliver a pair of head-worn glasses. And this Photon Lens, I actually had a conversation, an interview that's coming out next week with a company called Nueyes, Nueyes, CEO's name, Mark Greggett. And they have another product that is directionally similar to this one as well. And this device, like some of the others, all are dependent upon some other piece of kit that you've got in your body, you're holding in your hands. Right. And what's cool about Photon Lens is they seem to have some sort of very, very much about fitness and entertainment. They have a game console, basically, like a little Game Boy thing that you have in your hands you're using to help drive ultimately the experience.
Yeah, and from my understanding, it connects still wired to that device. So it's
right.
Basically these birdbath optics devices are designed to essentially be a heads-up display that that can remain being fairly light and nimble and sort of eyeglass looking, not like you're really going to wear them on the street, because all the compute power is essentially remote via a USB-C cable tethered. Eventually we'll get to wireless and near field communication, high speed, which I know a couple companies are working on. But it's an interesting thing that would you say there's probably at least 8, maybe 10 companies dancing this dance, which actually is interesting from a forward momentum standpoint, right? That there's that much funding, that much commitment to the idea of some sort of wearable that's kind of this interim step to what people really, really want, which is something that doesn't have any tether, doesn't have any wire, and has a certain kind of lifestyle use case and entertainment use case and productivity use case. The fact that it's not just 1 or 2 companies that believe this, that there are many companies around the world that believe this is an important step in the visual compute system, as well as all the tech giants, all kind of going to war, committing that people will be doing something beyond a traditional 2-dimensional, rectangular screen in the future. I think that's really good fodder for people to keep listening to your podcast, keep listening to this podcast, because this is where a big part of the world is tracking and heading. But to your point and my point a lot, over a very long period of time, probably still, at least 5 years till we see real traction, and probably 5 to 10 years until we see kind of the adoption curve that a lot of the investment groups predict are going to happen every 18 months ago, right? It's a long way to reach those dynamics. So maybe a last comment, and then we'll go into you as the guest.
Sure. Well, we can just have this one flow into the next part.
Go right into it, exactly.
So this notion, it's definitely going to be a long road, but companies like Photon Lens and others are benefiting from something that I think is enabling smaller companies to produce something like a pair of glasses that you wear in your head that's wired to some other device. And it's that there's this set of components, the display and the optics together, that are accessible enough. Like there's a number of companies who have put together a design that does this, that now you can go to an ODM, a manufacturing partner in Asia, and you can say, hey, I want that component into a pair of glasses, and then I'm going to attach it to my own software, my own algorithms, my own connected device, and ship a product. And kind of like the smartphone evolution, where there's all these components that are out there that allows the reassembly of the same basic bits into other devices, whether that look like smartphones inside, but are nothing like smartphones on the outside. I think that we're kind of getting there from a supply chain perspective. That's what this evolution of all these clone-like devices is indicating. But what I like about Photon Lens and New Eyes and Real and some of the others is that they're attacking the market using these kind of very narrow slices. Back to something we said at the top of this conversation, was this notion that there's some specialization. This notion that these Photon Lens or New Eyes or whatever, they kind of pick a slice. It's fitness, it's entertainment, it's some other aspect of health, it's social expression. Like we saw the announcement from Snap about their
Charlie and I talked about fast. Yeah, exactly. Right.
And it's another example where they're, because we have such constraints for this sort of device, picking something very narrow gives you the chance of creating at least a decent experience around it.
Right.
And if you can create something decent, you get that toehold, then you have a chance to kind of build on it and evolve that product over time.
Exactly.
And this whole set of products and these whole set of companies are taking a very different approach in many ways than what Microsoft is taking or what Magic Leap is taking. Because they have an all-in-one solution, meaning you're not dependent upon some other bit of compute like a smartphone or some other device that's wired to it. Everything's in the device itself. And there's a lot of imagined benefit from having all of what you need in that device that's on your head. But the downside is that it now looks like a contraption, now looks like a welding mask or a helmet.
Yeah, there are massive ergonomic challenges, which will get better over time as we evolve it, just like computers used to look very different than they look today. And, the idea of carrying something like a tablet was fantasy, all that, X amount of years ago, and now it is completely reality. So where you're talking about is kind of why I want to give these things always a long lead time, many, many years to evolve it. So I think this is great. I mean, obviously a really interesting discussion. We'll have you on again over, the periods of time when either I take off or Charlie takes off again, and maybe we'll include you on a regular basis because your voice is so valuable in this case. For the last few minutes, let's sort of migrate over to you no longer as a co-host, but as a guest to talk about your day-to-day work with a very interesting technology company that I'm also quite enamored with and somewhat involved in. And let's just spend 5 or so minutes talking about your belief structure about where that company, Ostendo, fits into this ecosystem and what you do there.
Yeah. So we've all been observing the slow evolution of this space. And what we are proving really well right now in the enterprise, for example, is that there is tremendous potential value for having this sort of system, some sort of head-worn system that allows you to be eyes up, hands on the problem you're working, and delivers, guided instructions or, collaboration with somebody who's not with you, remote collaboration, and data visualization. Like there's a number of use cases that we've proven in the enterprise that there's real potential there. And there's anticipation that we can apply some version of those concepts to the consumer world. And we kind of talked about this notion that people end up with a handful of specialized devices. But the belief that I have, that Ostendo I think more generally has, is that the evolution of this market is dependent upon getting something, a set of ingredients that is small enough and efficient enough to enable wearability, like true wearability. Right. And the evolution of previous cycles has been one where people have tried to develop something for the enterprise market, and they come at it from some other enterprise beast, and they try to make some sort of specialized enterprise tool. But as we kind of look back and we think, okay, what works today in enterprise? Just to focus on enterprise for another moment here. What works today in enterprise? And it is consistently the consumer grade device that has been upgraded to be enterprise class, correct, and not some evolution of an enterprise device, that whether it's PC era, smartphone era, etc. It's usually the thing that wins in the enterprise is the consumer grade architecture.
Yeah, it's the idea that things move upstream from the consumer, not downstream from the enterprise. Right.
And so if we think about this upstream versus downstream evolution, the HoloLens would need to rethink the way that they're approaching the problem in order to have that sort of perspective and deliver in that direction. They're coming at it from the other way. But from that perspective, the sort of bottom-up sort of perspective, wearability is critical. That is the hard constraint. So it's in order to achieve wearability, given the set of technology that exists over the next 5-10 years, it is not then a standalone device. It is a device that is dependent upon other bits of computing around you.
The tandem device.
Tandem device.
Yeah.
And ideally, it's wirelessly connected. Ideally, you can create something that's so efficient on the face that you can wirelessly connect. That's the direction that Snap is exploring. And I'm super excited about that direction. But it also implies that there has to be a lot of compatibility with that smartphone. It has to, you have to acknowledge that the device is a complementary tool amongst the other kit you've got going on. And beyond that, it has to be affordable. The set of ingredients that are going into the thing has to be manufactured at scale and at a very reasonable price point. And those things, this kind of notion of wearability, compatibility, and affordability is kind of the focus that I and my company at Ostendo have on how to deliver on the promise. And we fundamentally are an ingredients company, a components company at our core. We've innovated in the display of the light, how to create the pixels that we're actually seeing. And so we have an inorganic LED-based, micro LED-based display solution, which is amazing in lots of ways. We don't have time to kind of go into all the things, but one of the things that it does better than others is because it's inorganic LED based, it's really efficient how it generates light, but it's also volumetrically extremely efficient. It's more than an order of magnitude smaller in terms of volume than the next best solution out there, even the next best micro LED based solution. We're talking
and
about
I think
full color.
You're talking as an expert, but I think let me open this up for people to understand. When you talk about why this device is so important, it's a little chipset, the visual chipset that goes into all of these glasses in some way, shape, or form. But the Ostendo device is an order of magnitude smaller than anything else that comes close to doing what it does, and an order of magnitude more efficient. So you're talking about something that is a quarter or a sixth of the size of the next best solution for this little chip that looks like a little piece of silicon that actually creates the visual image. A little micro television is a good way to describe it from a layman standpoint.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
And that's what's really critical about what they're doing. What they're bringing to the market is something that we might someday actually be able to wear comfortably, that actually looks and feels like eyeglasses as opposed to a visor, as it were.
Yeah, that's right. And so right now, the company that we call the display, the chipset, the QPI, Quantum Photonic Imager, we're also right now really focused on the next piece in the puzzle, which is the lens that you look through at the real world, which of course has the double duty of allowing you to see the real world in an undistorted way, but also getting that virtual image into your eye. And so we're working on our own solution to that. So we're looking forward to presenting that to the world, this combination of both our chipset, the micro display, as well as the combiner optics solution.
It's great. Yeah, I mean, and obviously we could go very deep into that, but for the sake of this podcast and the time that people like to listen to it, we'll probably wrap up here. So let people know where they can learn more, the website, some touch points about the product sort of direction, another sort of minute or so, and then we'll say goodbye for the week, and we'll see everybody again next week.
Sounds great. Yeah, you can find more about Ostendo at www.ostendo.com. That's OSTENDO.com. And we have some stuff up there now that kind of describes our vision for the sort of product that's going to be possible in the very near term using our technology. So go and check that out. And for me personally, you can find me on the social channels. My last name is McDowall. That's my Twitter handle, and you can find me on LinkedIn using that search. And of course, the podcast, you can find that on all your favorite podcasting sources. And it is, the website's www.thearshow.com.
Right. So
thearshow.com.
Regular listener, I'm a regular listener. I recommend people hop onto it, especially if you're listening to this show. That's a good dovetail show. We'll cross promote and share each other's links and stuff. This was a great sort of episode, a little modified episode of the AR Show, or This Week in XR and the AR Show kind of combined together. So I look forward to seeing you all next week and talking to you all next week, and more fun to come. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Ted. Thanks, everybody.